Hello, I'm Gavin Houchell and welcome to another of the Head Honcho interview series. I'm delighted to be joined by Emma Hogan, the Executive Director of the Customer Experience Group at Foxtel. Emma leads the strategic and operational function of the entire organisation of customer experience and is responsible for over 3,000 people. And prior to that role, she led the people and culture function for Foxtel. You've held a number of senior leadership roles within HR across the likes of Woolworths and Qantas, so very pleased for you to join us today. Thank you, Emma.
Thanks for having me.
Good stuff. Now, Emma, your career, how did you get set to move into leading the customer experience group? Perhaps you can explain that to us.
I've been with Foxtel for nearly 10 years, 9.5 years, and ran HR for a long time, about 8 of those. And we had a situation where the exec director of the customer experience group left and we didn't have a replacement, and so I caretook the role for a while, and I just saw an opportunity and thought, I quite like this, and I turned out that I was okay at doing it, and I asked my boss to take a chance on me and give me the job permanently. And he didn't just say yes, he sought feedback from my other colleagues and the board, and they decided to give me an opportunity. So I think it was, I'm not sure, well, in fact I know, I would never have gotten that opportunity had it not been an internal move. Right, yeah. But I had been there a long time and I was well known to everyone, and it was, it was risky, but it was a known risk, and I had loads of support and loads of help. So, frankly, it's running 80% of the business is people, and I'd come out of people and culture, so it was a real opportunity to put my money where my mouth was. So,
what fits in your portfolio then in customer experience?
At the moment, I have the way it works is once you've purchased Foxtel, whether you've done that online or whether you've done that through a call centre, once you've done that sale, everything that happens to you as a customer thereafter belongs to me. So the installations, call centres that cover service, billing, if you want to change your package, if you want to exit Foxtel. I have transformation, supply chain, and I have planning, and I have installations. And we've got about 1,200 installations through our partners across the country, and we also have an operation in currently South Africa, India and Manila.
Oh, wow.
It's a very big people gig that's quite complex and servicing 2.5 million customers. So it's very exciting.
Fantastic. Now, we met about 15 plus years ago.
We did.
Time flies.
For us, yes.
And it's fair to say that HR back in that area versus HR today has changed quite dramatically. What do you feel as a HR executive, putting your old hat on, are some of the key strategic objectives when you're in that helmsmanship?
Look, there's a couple of things I think I've noticed over the years. Everybody went through this phase of saying, HR needs a seat at the table, which just drove me mental. And I think that's true. I think organisations really want to take a strategic approach to people and the role people play in the success of their organisation, or they don't. And I think successful HR people operate at their best in the organisations that really want to do that and understand the lever it is and how it contributes to company results. So I've always been lucky in that I've worked with CEOs who have genuinely believed in that. And so I've always been confused by this seat at the table thing, because I kind of always had one, and if I wasn't at that seat on the table, my boss had something to say about it, So I was confused about that. But what I think has changed is I think it's absolutely true that HR people need to have commercial nous and they need to be able to speak the language of the business. But I think sometimes it's gone so far the other way that it's so commercial that you forget that a large part of your role is to be the voice of the people.
Right.
And it's to run change, and it's to effectively communicate to your staff about where the business is going and how you can bring your best self to work to contribute to that business. And I think sometimes now it's gone so hard that strategically I think you have to be a numbers person, you have to be a commercial person, but you also have to be the rational voice of the people. I'm not suggesting you be warm fuzzy, but I'm suggesting that you really understand the difference that people make to the organisation, and that is your voice. That is what you are there to represent. And I think that's changed a lot over the years. It's gone from being an admin function, a warm fuzzy function, to a super commercial function and I think now the real value is around change management.
Yeah, fantastic to hear. Now, taking your current hat off and thinking back into the shoes of HR directors, many people aspire to that next move, and sometimes that's obviously into an operational P&L leadership role. What advice or insights could you share now you've made that transition to perhaps other HRDs thinking about their next steps?
I had always wanted, I think, to work in the business, but I'd never really known what role. I think the biggest advice I would give anyone is to take the opportunities when they come. So I had an opportunity to run a big change project that was within a business unit, and so I did that, which gave me some project management skills that I wouldn't necessarily have gained just in the HR world. When the opportunity came and this was a vacancy, they didn't come to me and say, can you caretake it? I went and said, hey, I reckon I could have a crack at this, and it's a really big group of people, and you don't want to have I said to my boss at the time, you don't want to have an additional 9 direct reports, let me take that off your hands. And there was no downside for him, and he did that, and then I just maximised that opportunity. But you have to stick your hand up, I think. You have to put yourself out of your comfort zone. You have to have a go at things that are not traditionally in your remit. And most of all, you have to have really good relationships with people in the business. So I had generated a lot of trust over the years. So when that opportunity came, people were very keen for me to have a go at it. Even though I didn't have the experience, they were like, oh, we'll help her. And that was really good for me. So my advice would be to look outside the square for opportunities, as opposed to just take opportunities within what you're good at, because that's what makes you stand out and makes people think you're capable of a broader set of opportunities than perhaps you are naturally given with a job title.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, I talk to a lot of organisations about being achievement focused. If I can turn things to you, and if you're happy to share, if you were to identify 2 or 3 key personal achievements that you're proud of, what are those, and why would you select those?
There's probably a couple of things. At Foxtel, Foxtel merged with Ozstar or purchased Ozstar in 2012-13, and I had a big opportunity to run the change program for that, and it was a really tough time because it wasn't a hostile takeover. It was a positive thing, but you were bringing 2 cultures together, and obviously in that scenario, some people are exited because you don't need double the roles, and that's tough. It's a tough thing for anyone to lose their job. But what I was proud of there was the way in which that was handled, and we'd said to everybody when we bought it. We brought all the leaders together on day one, and we said, in the next 6 weeks, we're going to go through this process, but in 6 weeks' time, everybody will know what their future is. And they did. We delivered on that. And of course, there were some people that were affected, and it wasn't a positive outcome for them, but we made it a dignified experience. We had a really clear comms plan. We had very key people you could go to if you had challenges. And for me, I was just really proud of the fact that that was a really good example of a commercial outcome we needed to get, but managing people in a way that was dignified and brought them on the journey to deliver their best results once we were through that process. And we became one Foxtel, and we made a really big deal out of that. So that would be one thing that I think, not just for me, but my whole team. And the other thing would be taking on the customer experience role. I think to suddenly take on 3,000 people and be completely in a P&L environment when I'd had 20 years of advising people how to lead people, to go and swap from a team of 80 to a team of 3,000 was, you try to look like you're gliding across the water, but your feet underneath. But I have loved every minute of it. So that's probably been a big achievement and setting the strategy. And the biggest thing I learned in that job was you don't have to know everything to be effective. And I look back now and I think my HR team must have hated me, because if I was really interested in something, I'd be diving right in there and getting involved. In this job, I can't do that. I don't know how to run an installation. I don't know, but I know how to project manage, and I know how to run people, and I know how to keep people accountable, and I understand strategy. And they were the skills that I needed. And what I've loved about this experience is the realisation that you can really lift and shift those skills to anything if you're committed to letting people do their jobs and empowering people to do their jobs. So that's been, I've always known that up here, but to actually live it and let somebody get on with it because you actually don't know how to do their role, that's been a really liberating and eye-opening experience. And I'm proud of how I've handled that. I'm proud that I didn't go try and get down the hole on everything, and I've stayed sort of at a level where you know enough to make a decision, but you don't know so much that you're making people feel micromanaged, and that's been a really great experience and achievement for me.
Good for you. Lovely to hear. And one final question. If we could go back to that coffee we had at, I think it was at Town Hall kind of days.
Woolies,
Woolies days it would have been. And you could look in the mirror and give yourself some advice back in that era, what would that have been?
I'm sure you've read a lot about it and talked to a lot of girls who have it, but for many, many years I had imposter syndrome. I really thought any day now I'm going to get found out, you know, that I don't really know what I'm doing. And Kim Williams, who was my boss at Foxtel for a long time, saw this in me, and he believed in me a lot earlier than I believed in me. And he said to me, you know, what's your evidence? What's your evidence to genuinely think that you don't have what it takes? You've constantly been promoted, you've constantly been given great feedback, you know, these are all the positives. Where does this come from? And I'd never really thought about it like that. It's just a feeling. And so I had imposter syndrome for ages, and then another colleague of mine, our CFO at Foxtel, said to me once, and this is the best piece of advice I've ever given, and I would pass it on to anyone, particularly women do it. He said, can you stop apologising all the time? And I said, what do you mean? And he said, when you're at exec, you always start a conversation with, I'm sorry, I won't keep you long. Or you start an email with, sorry to interrupt, or sorry to ask you to do this. And he goes, it just makes us feel like what you're actually saying isn't that important. And I had never ever heard myself saying it, and then I went back through all these emails and I was like, oh
my gosh.
I still catch myself doing it now. Like if I'm asking someone to do something that I know that they'll find is not high on their priority list, I'll start with, I'm so sorry, I know you've got a lot on your plate. But when you change it to, hey, we've got an objective here to get this done, wondering when you might be able to get that done, and people go, oh yeah, like he said to me, you just got to stop saying sorry and stop apologising for your existence, because you've got a lot to say, but if you start with that, people don't hear the main, and it was a game changer for me. I'd never known it, and I've passed it on to many people since, and I've done a lot of leadership speaking about women in leadership in particular, and I use that story, and so many people say to me, oh God, I do that all the time. And it seems more prevalent in women than men, both imposter syndrome and this apology thing. And then I've started reading articles about it, and it's everywhere. It turns out it's not just me. But the biggest piece of advice I would give myself is to back myself and don't apologise for my existence. I've got something to say, and when I don't, I know how to find out. And I wish I'd spent the last 10 years with a bit more self-belief and not as much, or the last 20 years, and not as much sort of, not anxiety, but that added pressure on myself all the time. Work harder than everyone, you know, be better, always strive for excellence. And they're not bad qualities. They've definitely got me to where I've got to go, but I reckon I could have done it with a little less feeling of never being good enough, you know. That's not what the evidence suggests. And so, look at the evidence, don't apologise, back yourself, go hard. That's my advice to myself 10 years ago.
Good to hear. Well, I apologise for not having you on this earlier, so thank you. Lovely insights. You stay well. Thank you so much, Emma. Cheers.
Thanks.
Bye-bye.